It's now my great privilege to introduce Foster Harding, a wonderful friend, an amazing practitioner, a wise individual, and a published author. It's our great blessing to have him in our community. And Foster, I love you. Godspeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm aware that there's some competition happening that might be quite interesting to many of us, so I'm grateful for your presence. I'm grateful for the presence of some people that are not here very often. Marilyn and I have some guests at our home, and they came this morning, so I'm grateful to see them. And all of you who are here, bless your hearts. Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for that song. The words to that song are in such good harmony with the message I'm going to bring just now, so perfect. Our theme for October is transforming fear. We all know what fear feels like. For me, it feels like an empty spot right here, kind of hollow and anxious and antsy. If it's really strong fear, my hair starts to stand up on the back of my neck, almost never up here. But we know what fear feels like. Problems can arise when the feeling of fear sometimes lingers long after its mission to keep us safe is complete. Once that car or bullet missed you, that event is as over as the Trojan War, but it often does not feel as over as it is. Lingering fear can make us barely functional, feeling hopeless, depressed, or reacting with a hair-trigger display of temper and anger. It's important to remember that we're only stuck in this place until we make a different choice. Fear lingers when we've lost our connection to the eternal security that rests in divine love. When we are still in fear after its usefulness is past, it's a sure sign that our head and heart balance is somehow out of sync. It's true that your body, which is your soul's primary tool in this earthly life, can suffer pain, physical injury, even death. But the soul, your true essence, is anchored in a realm that is safely beyond any such possibility. Your eternal essence is always okay. So when we're stuck in fear, the solution is to remember your divine connection. Consciously anchor in your heart center and place your head functions in their rightful relationship to the heart, in service to the heart. Don't leave your fear panic-stricken head in charge of your life. Terry Cole Whitaker, who has a monthly column in Science Mind magazine, this month points out that stopping and taking several deep breaths is a simple way to reconnect to your heart center. In your heart center, you always know the truth of who you are, a child of the universe, the beloved creator, source. You literally are an eternal soul having an earthly experience. Accepting your true nature reminds you that the divine is always present within you, as you. Trust in your truth will transform your fear into assurance that all is well. Seems easy when I say it, but it's not always so easy to put into practice. When our fearful emotions persist and your heart connection is hard to feel, probably the most powerful tool at our disposal is prayer. So our title this morning is Transforming Fear Through the Power of Prayer. That might bring us to a basic question. What is prayer? For many of us, our response to that question has shifted and grown as we've matured. When I was a child, prayer was an act of pleading, literally pleading for a distant reluctant, judgmental God to notice me. And that itself was brave. Sometimes you thought it would be better off if that guy wasn't noticing you. But once he did notice me, I was hoping that he would find me deserving of my request, whatever it was. At times I even engaged in begging with this distant version of God. It felt sort of like asking or even begging a powerful, distant great-grandfather who was reputed to be moody and often grouchy to provide an advance on my hopefully promised iffy-feeling inheritance. Given that mindset, the odds were probably not so good. Thankfully, pleading, sucking up to God, and crossing my fingers against long odds are no longer my approach to prayer. In my late 20s into mid-30s, such prayers felt more and more contrived and off target. They were no longer the right words or process, and I knew it. My perceptions of God had grown, but I didn't have a new prayer process for some time. So the habits lingered far beyond whatever usefulness they may have ever had. For a number of years, I didn't pray at all. It didn't seem to make any difference, so why bother? A refreshing new prayer process finally arrived as Science of Mind treatment, or affirmative prayer, in the Beyond Limits class at Mile High Church about a decade ago. Dr. Ernest Holmes had a lot to say about the 5 steps of affirmative prayer. I want you all to relax. I'm just going to summarize what those 5 steps mean to me. I'm not going to bring out a lot of Ernest just yet. So, we have the 5 steps of affirmative prayer up there. I'm just going to briefly tell you what they mean to me as a practitioner. Recognition is simply me kind of stepping back and looking at creation. And the physical aspects of it are the cosmos, which is so vast we can't possibly comprehend it. The non-physical aspects of it, and Gary Zugoff says almost everything is non-physical, but the non-physical includes the intelligence and the creative energy that resulted in all that is. So all of that, hard to get my arms around it, is the divine. Everything in aggregate, both what we can be aware of and what we don't even have a clue about, all of that is the divine one. Okay, unification. That's merely affirming that allness includes me. The biggest lie human beings ever tell themselves is that we are separate from God. That is not the way it is. It is impossible, because God is all. So once you've accepted that you are held within this divine one, then the next step is realization. And realization is kind of realizing the implications of that oneness. It's saying, oh yes, the client I have with me as a practitioner, or the world at large, or anything in between, is already within this oneness. The prayer I'm speaking and the answers to that prayer are already present. They're already here. The prayer is answered, as Jesus said, before we even ask. Our Father knows what we need. So the prayer is answered before we even spoke it. Once that gets sort of accepted within, you don't have to try and conjure up gratitude. It just flows. The good news that you've just realized within yourself is so compelling. For me, the gratitude just kind of wells up from someplace here in my heart space, I guess, and just flows out, and I just am so grateful for everything, for life. Right now I'm feeling grateful for all of you. And once the gratitude has flowed, has begun, has been felt, that prayer is done. prayer is done. Its work is complete, so we can just release it. Just let it go into the heart of the divine where it came from in the first place. Its work is done. We can let it go. We can move on into our day, our week, our life, because the prayer work is complete. In the realm of spirit, it is already done. And it is going to manifest in the experience of those I have been praying for, but not necessarily just 100% perfectly like I said it. And I'm going to explain why that's the case. But that's what's going on when a practitioner is praying, doing a treatment, meeting with a client, whatever. Ernest had a lot to say about prayer beyond those 5 steps. And I sort of have the sense that Ernest had his own internal growth experience when he was writing the Science of Mind textbook. Because early in the book, the prayer descriptions are quite prescriptive, quite detailed, quite structured. And as he moves through the book, his writing about prayer just keeps expanding. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of that. And so right now, I think I'm just going to read some quotes and comment on them, and a while into it, then we'll put up another slide. So we're answering that question through Ernest for what is prayer? A prayer is a movement of thought within the mind of the one praying for a specific purpose. That one makes me feel a little cramped, a little too restricted, because it seems like when I conjure up in my mind a real detailed description and mental picture maybe of what it is I'm praying for, a new car, and I know the color, and I want the interior to be this and so, and I want it to have 475 horsepower so I can squeak the tires and whatever it is. What I have done then, I think, is my own expectation, my own picture. Whoa, better not do that again. My own picture of what I expect kind of cuts me off from divine wisdom that might want to provide me something even more appropriate, more in line with what I really need. But I've sort of blocked that by zeroing in too much. Prayer can be a lot more than acting like a child making out a Christmas list. Next quote. Prayer is not an act of overcoming God's reluctance. I wish I'd read that a little earlier in life. But should be an act of acceptance of God's highest willingness. Act of acceptance kind of makes me feel uneasy. It's like giving up control. Maybe I'd rather focus on my desire and leave no chance for any misunderstanding about what I want. There's nothing wrong with what Ernest has said there. It's just my response to it. Next quote. Prayer is constructive because it enables us to establish closer contact with the fountain of wisdom, and we are less likely to be influenced by appearances around us. I think Ernest is saying that prayer can lift us above circumstances, to experience life beyond those apparent limitations. It can open the door to change our condition, or perhaps change our attitude about that condition. If you are already in a position where your prayer experience flows and what you are praying for is kind of comes into your life experience, wonderful. But if not, why not? Let's continue. True prayer must be, thy will be done. But the implication relative to the will of God in this prayer is not a submission to the inevitability of evil or limitation. It is the knowledge that the will of God is always good. That's kind of a hard one. Is acceptance of God's will fully possible for us as humans? Do we dare to trust God that much? It's completely counterintuitive to your ego to surrender that much control to anyone, even God. But is surrendering control the doorway to the power of prayer? Let's see what Ernest said about what determines the power in our prayer. Can we have the next one, Eric? Yes, what is it? He has some good things to say about that. This next quote is most interesting. Prayer does something to the mind of the one praying. It does not do anything to God. I want to say that last sentence again. Prayer does not do anything to God. It only does something to the one praying. Oh. For the first 6 decades of my life, when I did pray, it was to an external God out there somewhere with the aim of influencing that God to act in my favor. It sounds like that never was an effective way to pray. Hear the rest of his quote. This is the part that feels so powerful to me. The eternal gift is always made. The gift of God is the nature of God. The eternal givingness, God cannot help but make the gift because God is the gift. Okay, so God always makes the gift. What happens when it seems to us like our prayer didn't get answered? I think the next quote can move us in the direction of understanding. The teachings of Jesus imply the necessity of faith, conviction, and acceptance. That is, the response to our prayer must be measured out according to our own measuring. We must not only believe, but we must know that our belief measures the extent and degree of our blessing. If our belief is limited, only a little can come to us, because that is as we believe. How much can any person experience? As much as they can embody. By embody, I think Ernest means conscious capacity to accept, the size of your belief, maybe. Your belief is the mental equivalent. The next quote summarizes the implication of this. Right today, we can expect to demonstrate or have our prayers answered according to our belief and the embodiment of that belief. I'm looking for a little red 5. I don't know when to tell Eric to put that thing up. Must be time, Eric. Next one. Yeah, we're getting close. Okay. Prayer has power, not through repetition, but by belief and acceptance. So the power of our prayer is anchored in our belief. Our belief determines the experience of life. God gives it all, but we only get to receive that which corresponds to our belief. Much of our discussion so far seems focused on using prayer to align life with our desires, although we did mention trusting God's will rather than imposing our own. There is a higher form of prayer, with the goal of aligning us with our highest good, not merely with our desires. The next few quotes come from Living the Science of Mind, also by Ernest Holmes. Prayer in its truest sense is an alignment, a unifying process which takes place in the mind as it reaches to its divine self, that power which is greater than human understanding. And then the next one, Eric. Prayer then is communion, and this communion pronounces life to be good. In actual practice, one's life should become a continuous communion with good. One can think of communion as being centered in your heart space that naturally brings awareness of divine love, So it seems that prayer can range from a desperate scream for help to a sense of ongoing communion where we deeply feel our oneness with the very source of life. Slide 7, Eric. Maybe it's up there already. Yes, there it is. If we want to adopt a goal for our prayer life, the best I could come up with would be opening our hearts and minds to experience life as an ongoing communion with the divine presence. Okay, Foster, summarize what all that means to each of us. Slide 8. The potential of any prayer is infinite, but it is an ironclad rule of natural law that only that portion that reflects our belief is allowed to move into our life experience. Wishful thinking, even if eloquently stated using Ernest's 5 steps, doesn't get it done. Belief or faith gets it done. The divine creative energy is always and forever perfectly unlimited. It is our limitations of belief that throttle back its capacity to express in our lives. Here's the truth. We already are controlling our life experience. There is no one to blame when things go awry. Next slide, Eric, number 9. Life is always happening to us in perfect alignment with our belief. If we wish to use fear to transform, back up, Foster. If we wish to use prayer to transform fear, it's pretty clear that we can strengthen our prayer by strengthening our belief. If our belief feels weak, it's a sign that our head-heart balance is out of kilter. Then it's time to use prayer to reestablish our heart connection. The eroding power of reason inherently doubts what it cannot understand. Your heart lies beyond fear and reason, within a realm of divine love. Your heart has the natural wisdom to know that all things are possible. Your heart naturally trusts in divine power. So the strength of your belief resides in your heart, not in your head. You won't be able to reason your way to belief. It comes from here. I would add that prevention is more effective than cure. Staying in your heart center works better than losing the connection and trying to find it again. That's the blessing of prayer as an ongoing communion. It keeps you here. So the next couple slides will go quickly here. Let's get practical. How can we expand our belief, our trust, our faith? Number 10. The answer's on number 11. Prayer is the answer. So let's talk a little about that. Slide 12, Eric. Prayer can happen individually. We know that. You may have heard the saying, one person with God is a majority. That's surely true when our belief is already very strong. God and one person with a shaky or limited belief only results in a limited result. God can only do for us what we allow God to do through us. When your individual prayer does not feel powerful and you seem isolated from your good, community prayer can be a big help. Praying together is much more effective than praying alone from a shaky belief. Jesus touched on community prayer in Matthew 18:20. He said, "For wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them." To me, that just means that our belief in divine power can be much stronger as a group than by myself. You could meet with a practitioner. We've already talked a bit about that. How the practitioner, through his prayer, kind of opens a space of belief within him or herself, and because of oneness, We're all in this ball of oneness called divine grace. The client, or the prayer, the target of the prayer, if you would, is also included. And the opening of that space within the practitioner is kind of facilitating an opening within the client. And that client can then, because they have opened, receive the blessing of that prayer because their heart has been opened through that process. A prayer circle is actually the wording I used at our retreat last April to say I would love to see us somehow involved in prayer circles. And I think a prayer circle is a very powerful tool for enhancing the belief and therefore the power of the prayers that are happening. I think of it as a short-term prayer community, praying real time in a circle with each other really does generate a deep level of trust and acceptance of those prayers. I think that group dynamic, that group energy just feeds itself, and the whole thing generates a lot more power, a lot more strength of belief. So it's a wonderful tool, but it typically is focused on a single issue. Somebody says, let's pray about Reverend Julie's safe return from Salt Lake City. So we sit down in a circle and we pray about that. There's a whole lot of stuff out there, but that's what we're praying about today. So then, what is a Sangha? Last slide. We've got a couple of cute little deer discussing this question. I think of a Sangha as a longer-term prayer fellowship, not a circle. It's a deeper thing somehow. Its power and effectiveness is like a prayer circle on steroids. So I'm eager to participate in one. The term Sangha arose in the ancient Sanskrit language, the primordial language of India. It's kind of the mother tongue that all the other languages that are spoken in India, excepting English probably, kind of find their root in Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit, Sangha simply means community or group. No qualifiers, no extra words to explain further. And it meant that for 6,000 years in Sanskrit. When Buddhism came along 2,500 years ago, that word Sangha was adapted to refer specifically to the worldwide community of ordained Buddhist monks and nuns. So its initial meaning shrunk to a more specific thing. With some exceptions and modifications, that Buddhist understanding of Sangha has kind of dominated the world understanding of what it means today. We're not suggesting when we ask you to sign up for a Sangha that you also have to adopt Buddhism. If you are Buddhist, that's okay. But anyway, so here's what we mean by Sangha in this center. A Sangha is a small group of spiritually close friends who gather regularly to support each other's spiritual growth by sharing life at a deep level. The spiritual support shared within the Sangha includes listening, group discussion, wisdom readings, ceremonies, love, peace, compassion, meditation, and prayer. It could be more, it could be less of those that list. Depending on how many sign up, we could end up with only one or more than one. I noticed this morning that there, I think, were 11 signatures on the list. That's right on the borderline of whether it wants to become two or stay as one. If it gets too large, it gets unwieldy. The time that it takes to be deep and trusting with each other kind of makes it unwieldy if it gets too big. So we'll see how many actually sign up and how many Sanghas we end up with. I know that Reverend Julie and I and some of our other practitioners plan to participate, but I don't see us in the role of leading a Sangha at all. I think the Sanghas will be self-organizing. Those who make up the Sangha will run it. I think it's a concept whose time has come in our center. If being part of one is calling you, please sign up. If you're not sure, the best way to find out is give it a try. You can always withdraw if it doesn't fit you. It's not like we're asking you to sign up for eternity, okay? That's all I want to say about Sangha. Thank you. I feel like I just gave a really eloquent commercial, but anyway. Let us close this portion of our service with prayer. Beloved Creator, author of all that is, we are so grateful to be in the presence of divine grace as embodied in each person in this room. We give thanks for the power of prayer and the fact that we have that power at our disposal and we control how it helps us, and it keeps calling us to go deeper into who we are. We're so grateful for that dynamic, that opportunity to keep expanding into our spiritual nature. And so in that space of gratitude for these wonderful truths, we just do the best we can to accept, and we affirm that the truth is taking root within us by saying together, and so it is.